teenagers accused of killing her. Riley Keough plays Rebecca Godfrey, the real-life novelist, whose book is the basis for the series, and we follow her as she tries to figure out what really happened alongside her childhood friend Cam, who is now a police officer. Please join me in welcoming to the stage, starring as Cam, Oscar nominee Lily Gladstone. And creator and executive producer QUINN SHEPARD, and showrunner and executive producer SAMIR. Welcome everyone. Before we get to talk about the show, let's take a look over there. We saw you there, Lily, as Cam, and your character goes through an incredible range of emotion throughout this series. You know, not only is she dealing with the horror of the murder and the responsibility as a police officer, but she's reuniting with Rebecca, and she has history, and there's a lot of pain in their past, and then she doesn't know anything about her own origin story. Can you speak to your feelings when you first read the script, and what made you really say, yes, I absolutely want to play this role?
I was really intrigued by the opportunity to build and travel that arc, because I feel like with a piece like this, with a piece like my last project that just did its thing, true crime is such a fascinating genre, and it has been for a long time. There's something that we're all so compelled by with these stories, and I feel like a lot of times the human element of it, particularly the people who suffered the most, are the ones that get erased. The thing that happened to them becomes a sensationalized thing for the media, and then it becomes something for consumption. And I feel like my last project did a beautiful job self-indicting in that regard, and I feel like this project was very, very thorough in how it decided to do that. Bringing Riley's character, who, you know, I heard Riley was doing this, and I've been dying to work with her for so long. We've lapsed each other, lipsed each other in a lot of circles, and it was just time to close that and make our own little circle. But when I was talking with Quinn and Samir, even before I'd seen much more than the pilot and the second episode, they were so thoughtful in a way that I had just gone through the ringer with and felt really, really compelled by. And that it's a modern story, that it's one that is so seminal to a lot of policy change recently, where it happened. You know, we have to have conversations about how we change large systems that enable crimes like this to happen. And that's what this show was very careful about doing, about bringing the voices of the family and what their experience was with the media, which I feel like Riley's character in bringing Rebecca into the narrative herself as the woman writing about this. That's a wonderful way to self-indict the sensationalism that often happens with true crime journalism, with writing these books, when somebody's career blows up because of another family or somebody's tragedy. And then Cam, I was really curious about having the conversation of the law enforcement side of that. How is in the other source material that was optioned came from Manjeet Virk, Reena's father, and talked very, I guess explicitly, very in detail about what their experience as a family was, the racism that they felt coming from the police and coming from the media, the way they didn't take it seriously at first, the way the whole trial just overwhelmed them with the fascination people had with it, and ultimately how Reena kind of got in that whole swell dehumanized all over again in that process. So I really liked that everybody had a very strong sense of correcting that and ultimately centering the narrative on Reena, on her very human things about them that made this a tragedy. And, also the really broad impact that it had.
Quinn, I have to say it's an extraordinary accomplishment, what you've done here. Not only tackling, adapting a very personal book written by Rebecca Godfrey, but also collaborating with her, and then, so sadly she passed away before the show could be made. But talk to us about coming to the story and working with Rebecca on how to tell her story.
It's interesting because Rebecca herself had said in an interview like back in the 90s when she was working on this book that she had never been interested in writing about crime, but she was interested in writing, and she was interested in this crime. And she had sort of stumbled into this story back when she was the age that I am now, totally by accident. She was working on a fiction book at the time, like her first novel, and she met the kids who had been involved in the crime like completely on accident. And I think in some interesting ways, like I kind of stumbled into this story in the same way. Like one of our executive producers, Tara Duncan, brought me the book because I had written a script, a fictional script, that had like a lot of really similar themes. And she was like, oh, this made me think of you. And I read the book, and I was so struck by it because I think for sort of the same reasons that Lily expressed, like I think I'd always felt a little bit of an aversion towards the concept of working on a true crime, because I think the instinct is that it's going to be something that's like very violent or very exploitive. And the book really struck me because it's such an ensemble. There's such fascinating characters in it. The characters are so young. The kids involved in this crime were middle schoolers. So that was like just something I had really never seen before. And the book itself was written with like so much poetry, and like it was very clearly personal, even though Rebecca didn't make herself a character in the book. And then when I started reading about her own past in the town, like she had grown up in the town where this happened, she had had a tragedy as a kid when she was there, and that had sort of shaped her own interest in writing about troubled youth. And she herself was like a real rebel and a punk when she was 13, 14, 15 there, and really like related to some of the kids. I just honestly, I found it really interesting and kind of like a very human way in. And so yeah, I got to meet her pretty soon after I came on board with the show, and we spent almost 3 years working together. I got to know her really well. I like moved to upstate New York so I could like be by her while I was developing the pilot. And it was really interesting though, because part of making her a character in the show was about removing ourselves from her perspective as the answer to what had happened or who we should sympathize with in the story. Like I think I was very aware that the book, like the more I got to know her, the more I realized that she is a character because her own perspective shapes the book. And so the book is beautiful, but it's also one way of looking at the crime. And so part of having Riley playing her in it was that we got to explore how she felt about the crime, but also how other people felt very differently about it. And yeah, I mean, getting to know her, it was a very interesting experience to talk to somebody who, she had worked on this for 7 years and like went quite deep in. I mean, she was like inseparably close with some of the people who were involved, and like you kept in touch with them for, one of the characters worked for 20 years, and I saw how much it had shaped like everything in her life, her experience on this. And I think in some ways I was like, okay, I'm gonna get into this kind of dark place with you and go on this journey. And she was very generous with what she shared with me. Yeah.
It is so important with something like this to show an even-handed approach, and so I really love how you built out Cam's side of things and Rebecca's side of things, and even Cam's father's side of things. It tells like a very full story of some very difficult to understand crime, and I really loved how you all handled that. Samir, you've worked on some amazing shows before. One of my favorites, Tell Me Lies, and Little Fires Everywhere. And tell us about your feelings going into this and how you knew it was going to really be a great series, and kind of the collaborative process. Just speak to that if you can.
Yeah, I'm in very similar boat where I did not immediately want to do a true crime story. I had done a couple before, and I had some ambivalence about just wading to that territory again. But then I read Quinn's script. We first talked, and yeah, the beginning conversations were really like just a very quick, I think, sort of gut check to see, do we want to do the same thing? Do we want to tell the same kind of story? And is there a reason to do this? If we're going to do it, do another true crime show, do another murder mystery show. Is this purposeful? Is this intentional? And it's funny, the first day I remember we talked about, surprisingly, black holes. And to the point where we were like, should we start this show in space? The reason being, I remember asking Quinn on day one, I said, okay, so if this show is ultimately meant to be one about radical empathy, we have to be able to access that level of empathy when we don't want to. Because if it's easy, if it's someone you already like, you're actually not actually engaging in that practice. So the question was, what role does psychopathy have? You know, it's something that's here. The level of evil on display in the show is amongst us. We can not like that that's true, but it's still here. So the question becomes, what do we do with it? How do we integrate it? How do we keep ourselves safe from it, but also sort of look it in the eye and deal with it? So we talked about black holes because, you know, black holes are this sort of like unrelenting pit that only takes, doesn't give, it kind of has no purpose, but we don't necessarily hate it. We sort of approach it with a sense of mystery. Like, what is this thing? Why is it here? Why does it seem to consume all light? And we stay away from it, but we still sort of have an appetite to understand it, which I think is important if we as a collective are meant to grow in any way and prevent crimes like this from happening. So the beginning was largely a quest to do that and not just sensationalize the violence, as we've been saying.
I thought about this show so much after I finished it, precisely because of what you said. You know, it's very hard as a human to understand that there are people who genuinely, they're psychopaths or sociopaths, and they walk among us, you know, and how are you supposed to think about that? But Rebecca's take is, you're not the worst thing you've ever done. She's always looking for the redemption in people, and it's about finding that line between the irredeemable and the redeemable. Lily, I'd love to hear more about your experience of working with Riley as well, because the scenes with the two of you are just crackling. There's all this story between you, and then there's the people that play the younger you, and I'd love to hear about building that whole relationship.
I feel like it was pretty quick and effortless, maybe because Riley and I have had just a professional awareness of each other and appreciation for each other's work for so long, but we never had actually got to meet in person until we were making this show. Just, you know, likes back and forth on Instagram. She called me for advice about people to reach out to for War Pony when she was making that. So we've had just kind of a, you know, hey, what's up? I like what you're doing for a long time. And then getting to parse through these kind of difficult conversations that we both like to have in the work that we do. And getting to, in some ways, be antithesis of one another and have a really well-rounded conversation by playing these two characters with two very different opinions about one character in particular. That really is the seed of a lot of conversation that we want to have as human beings and as artists. This idea of radical empathy, this idea, I mean, so much in this story and the aftermath of it and stuff that we can't even begin to touch on, even in 8 episodes, but has a really big cultural impact, touching into themes of this elusive but very necessary concept and conversation around restorative justice. And being in a landscape where that conversation very much happens and is led by Indigenous people. It's something that Riley is aware of and wants to support, and I just have, I have so much respect for her and the character she's willing to take, the kind of hits she's willing to take to have these conversations, to really leverage her own privilege and her own position in society to have these necessary dialogues, and do so in an artistic way that we can all access and kind of draw ourselves into that too. So yeah, working with Riley is, I mean, she's fun, she's committed. God, nobody's more committed than her. To just put it all up there and to have these moments, and she's so, it's easy to build chemistry quickly with somebody who's generous. You're generous with your character, with your time in a scene together. There was no sense of anything else in our scenes together except for each other. And we had conversations, of course, about what the relationship was. You know, Quinn really flushed all of that out for us. We both knew in a meta sense what our characters more represented when we're talking about the grand, I guess, allegories that could be made and shown in the show.